Yes, first and foremost, because we're here at the Parliament buildings, I think it's so important to acknowledge that we're actually on unceded Algonquin territory.
And I mean, it's kind of exciting to be here, but at the same time, I'm really kind of torn. For me, when I got my card, I was kind of happy that I was actually, now I'm finally an Indian.
Your status card?
I'm a status card. You know, but a lot of people don't care about the status card. I mean, and should I rely on the government to tell me that I'm an Indian? I shouldn't have to. But I mean, that's all I had. That was the biggest thing that came forward to me is when I received that card. But now, if I feel like I should have it tattooed on my arm because I have to show it everywhere I go. It's everything that reflects upon me is coming from that card.
That's why I think it's so important to discuss the Indian Act and to really ask hard questions about whether or not the Indian Act is actually good for us as Indigenous people. Because if it's a colonial number that defines and is the backbone of our identity, then we're never truly going to be able to access who we are, because we're defining ourselves from a colonial perspective. I can't help but think of I Don't Know More and all of the imagery that came out of this exact place, you know? The media's coverage of that was so important because it broadcasted Indigenous people standing up to every single living room in Canada. And so the media is potent and powerful and has the opportunity to really change the way people see us as Indigenous people and the way they see our issues that we were up against.
And that's why we're meeting these people that are trying to shift the paradigms of policy and, you know, trying to make those changes with what we have that we're working with now.
My name is Chris Nargang. I am an archaeologist and artist. My grandmother was a residential school survivor who hid her true identity from our family. I am on this journey to find my truth, reconcile the past, and continue the legacy that was stolen from her.
I'm Sarain Fox. I'm Anishinaabe from Batchewana First Nation, and I belong to the Three Fires Medewan Medicine Society. The movement of Indigenous knowledge revitalization is thriving across Turtle Island, and I want to introduce Kris and all of you to the revolutionary work being done by those who have dedicated their lives to shifting colonial narratives by harnessing Indigenous knowledge.
We are the future our ancestors dreamed of.
Our prophecies tell us that the time is now to reclaim, rematriate, and revitalize the knowledge intended for us. This is future history.
Well, welcome to Innisfil. We are about to head to Russ Diabo's place.
What's really cool is that there are so many incredible teachers and elders, you know, like Russ, who are making themselves available to teach all of our Indigenous ways of being and of knowing, and who have such a rich knowledge that they can access. It's that young generation coming up that is going to have all of the barriers removed so that we can actually take control of our own policies and our own future.
Well, and yeah, and I'm hoping that from what we hear today from him on policy, that we can explain to some people just exactly how things went down, because I really don't believe that with the history that's been taught in schools and curriculums and everything along the way, that we've ever actually had a true meaning to everything that's actually happened to us policy-wise. I guess this is it.
Let's see what Russ Diabo has to say about this. Awesome, thank you.
My name is Russell Diabo. I'm a member of the Mohawk Nation of Kahnawake, and I'm a First Nations policy analyst, and I've been doing that since the early 1980s. I guess from an Indigenous perspective, policy is the Canadian state's laws, policies, and practices regarding historically Indians, and then later on the Inuit and the Métis in Canada. At the time of contact, once the French-speaking peoples and then later the English-speaking peoples arrived on the shores of North America, they started to have a relationship with the Indigenous peoples. It was an early relationship of trade and alliance. And as the white European settlers started to outnumber the indigenous peoples, about the 1830s, then they started to pass laws over Indians instead of treating them as allies or partners. That's what led to the Indian Act. Once that new constitution was developed in 1867, the British North America Act, that's what colonized indigenous peoples, and that's where the provinces basically took over the lands, and Indians were pushed onto, marginal pieces of land called reserves. And the Indian Act has a definition section that defines who an Indian is, who a band is, who a member of the band is. So that's all contained within the Indian Act, and that's the main law or statute that Ottawa uses for funding Indian bands and reserves across Canada, even today. The original purpose of the Indian Act was to protect the Indians until they could be fully assimilated or civilized to become fit for Canadian citizenship or enfranchised. And once individuals or whole communities were enfranchised, they would simply become Canadians, with no legal distinctions. So that was the main purpose of the Indian Act, was to assimilate Indians into the general body politic of Canada. What the Indian Act has done is it's erased the memory of many Indigenous people across Canada, their knowledge of their histories and culture and traditional laws and customs. Those need to be looked at to see if they can be adapted into a modern situation. In the end, I think it comes down to values, because how we govern ourselves to get out of the Indian Act, we need to look at what our options are. We need to start thinking beyond just the reserve communities to our larger relationship with the other communities on a nation level and a territorial level. So you should be looking at the revitalization of languages, culture, the values that I talked about, the territory, knowing where your territory is, your traditional territory, not just the reserve lands, and knowing your history. Those are all elements, I think, that are important for nationhood and Indigenous identity and consciousness. I think we need more consciousness raising occurring. We need an Indigenous consciousness movement, because we have a common experience to the Indian Act colonizing all of us, regardless of what Indigenous nation we come from. But some have been impacted by it more than others, so each community has to find their own way out. And in order to do that, they need to take a look at their own history and culture.
Well, here we are in Magickaning, which also is known as Rama First Nation.
They have this beautiful First Nation school right here, and it's right next to where we're going to meet Kendra. The kids don't even have to leave their community. So I think this is where she works. Kendra Keach, Indigenous social worker.
So how is policy connected to social work?
Indigenous social workers can provide critical information to policymakers who can then shift policy to be more reflective of the needs of Indigenous children and families.
Ani bojo neswe nodanao kokwe dijnakaz, Magickaning donjaba mang dodam. So I'm Kendra, and I'm the Family and Youth Support Worker here at Rama First Nation Community and Family Services. So we were talking before about why we have medicine pouches. Hey guys!
Hey everybody, how are you?
Bonjour,
Come
how
in.
are you?
Bojo, join us.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So we were just talking about our medicine pouches.
How did your work in social work become this work with the youth?
I think because I grew up here, so I saw everything happening in my community, and I was always wondering when I was a kid, why don't they? Why don't they? Why doesn't someone? So I just wanted to provide a space for them to say what they wanted, a space for them to say what they needed, and then based on that, give them space to do. Because when they go to other schools off reserve, where maybe it's not safe to be Indian, they have to have that confidence that it's okay to make that choice.
So then, is this social work?
Yes, you wouldn't believe the stuff I hear. And then there's always steps I need to take as a result of some of the stuff I hear, which worries me because of bodies and organizations and how they handle those types of reports. That worries me. So that's why it's really important to give these kids the foundation so that when they have their own families, they're not running into problems where we have to involve people who don't understand who they are. Even if you provide a non-Indigenous person with training or teachings, it's only a frame of reference. It's not a lived experience. So I think to create real difference, you need to know. You need to have gone there and been there and found your way past that.
You must have all picked up one thing you think is most important for someone who's reclaiming their culture the way that you guys have.
One thing that I was taught by one of my elders is that every creation story is true. Don't let anyone tell you that it's not.
I was actually happy to have someone to talk to.
So it was like showed you love and respect, basically.
I like how it kind of showed us that we don't have to hide who we are. Like, since I've come to RAM, I've been really involved. Being part of the youth circle has just made it like times better, I guess. I don't have to hide who I am.
Well, I kept coming here because sometimes we'll learn about like sad things. I think it's important to like know these things and know what happened and like not try to like forget about them, like embrace it kind of, because like it did happen. So I think it's important to learn about those things.
Well, and I think these guys recognize how fortunate they are that they have grown up in a time where we have our own school here, so that the people who developed that school knew that that's what we needed to do to bring our kids home and to keep them home. So as long as we keep doing our work, it'll get better for everybody.
Okay, ready?
Okay, and... Okay, we're hot.
Okay, good time. Speed.
Rolling.
Beverly Blanchard, Batchewana First Nation.
My name is Justice Shabby. I'm from Saskatchewan. I'm from the Pheasant Rump Dakota First Nations.
Hi, my name is Katrina Langevin. I'm a member of Algonquin First Nation. I just think it's really important for this new generation of Indigenous people to be making room for Indigenous perspectives, especially in the law, because it's an area where First Nations people are scared, and they've been made scared through different processes.
We're not at the table at the CD, which was the Canadian-European trade agreement. We weren't there. And the TPP, we're not there. And the TPP, which Trudeau is still pursuing, has clauses in it that takes away the sovereignty of the government and so leads it to the corporation, which means that we will lose our land or we will lose our resources or our access to these because of what Canada's direction they'll go in on these trade agreements.
There are ways to fix it, and bringing attention to it is one of those ways, and through education is how I've learned how to deal with such problems.
We have a lot of Indigenous people, First Nations, who have educational backgrounds. We have lawyers. We have people that are qualified to be at those tables and to be there to talk and to represent our interests.
The relationship between Aboriginal people and the Government of Canada can and will prosper.
As I continue and move through law school, I hope that I can work specifically with First Nations people and show them their rights and show them that they should see themselves welcomed into that system, not oppressed.
It's really important that we start showcasing what we've got and how much information and how much skill sets we have, because we keep playing ourselves as marginalized, and we're not marginalized people. We are a force to be reckoned with.
Okay, so today is Nunavut Civic. Nunavut Civic.
That sounds pretty good.
I hope so.
Better you trying than me.
Nunavut Civic. But I'm sure they're going to help us out. That's the very first thing I'm going to ask when I get in there. So Ottawa is actually a really central hub for the North. If you look back in history, you can see like the fur trade and all of the, where the inlet comes down. Ottawa is the closest big city
to a lot of northern communities. So I think that's an interesting concept to reclaim parts of who you are away from your community, but we're seeing that so much. I think that's been a common narrative, is that sometimes you have to access a cultural hub in order to reclaim parts of yourself, parts of your culture, and bring it home to your community. And I think the end goal is eventually not to have to send people out, but in order to have that in our own community. So I think programs like this are really important to shifting that policies and being able to interact with the policies that are in place in a way that allows us to push the boundaries, especially for education. Because I think it is through education that the young people are actually able to change the system from the inside out. Okay, none of it's Sivanixavut.
Okay.
None of it's Sivanixavut. No, Sivanixavut. Shh.
None of it's
Sivanixavut.
Hi.
Hello.
Good morning.
Welcome.
How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you? Hey, Kris.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thanks for having us.
Well, thanks for coming. Welcome
Okay.
to Nunavut Sivanixavut.
We need a clarification.
1 second.
Okay.
Go back to that. Say it again.
Nunavut
Nunavut.
Sivanixavut.
Sivanixavut.
Perfect. You guys are pros.
I didn't know it was right.
I was right. we had a
Once
debate.
you got it, then
Yeah.
you don't lose it. So
You on a tour?
Please.
Yeah, okay. I'll show you around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nunavut Sivanixavut is an awesome program for Inuit youth in Canada. We've opened our doors to Inuit from all the regions. The Inuvialuit, Nunavut, Nunavik. It's an Inuit studies program where Inuit get to learn about themselves in a contemporary way. Historically, we look at our land claims agreement. They learn to understand who they are as a people. They learn to understand who they are as an individual, but also as a collective. What impacts did the government era have on Inuit societies?
There was the creation of a market economy rather than a subsistence economy.
Which also kind of made them dependent on this system because, there was people starting to live around these trading posts or these communities. It was a time where they became dependent, I think.
Absolutely. And these are all examples of policy. There's a lot of satisfaction in the work, and I see that there's a lot of benefits to the work that NS contributes to the future of Nunavut, to the health of our people. And it's important for the students to come out of this program with an idea of, okay, how are we going to move forward?
Some would argue that there isn't enough locals, enough Inuit being employed in these mines. If the regional Inuit organization or association believes the mining company is being unfaithful, they have the right to actually bring them to court and get compensated. So we do have a strong presence and a strong say in what does happen and what should happen in the future.
They're learning a lot of things about themselves academically. They're also figuring out who we are and our place in Canada and in the global community.
It's not only Inuit history, it's Canadian history. And in order for us to have that relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous is to understand each other, understand each other's history.
A lot of Canadians like to think that we're a multicultural society and we embrace all cultures. And we're not quite there yet as Indigenous peoples, but we are working on it. You guys are working on it. You're part of that story. You're part of that curve moving up. You know your stuff. You're awesome.
Civic. Civic.
Ah, yes, that's awesome. I
That
think
might
that's
be
how
closer.
it is. We started this episode on Parliament Hill, and to me represents policies, government that made all of these horrendous things happen. And now here in this room, you know, it's more of the legacy, the children who suffered, my ancestors. And I keep thinking about my children or maybe my grandchildren. And I hope that one day we'll be able to abolish the Indian Act and move forward. And that's what we're working on right now. We're healing each other. And I think if we all do that, then we'll collectively become a healed nation that is ready to define our own future.
And I hope that, you know, with the words that we hear from these great people we're speaking with and that we meet, that they're heard by the people that need to hear it, the Canadian public and the rest of the world. And I hope the policies will change, Sarain. And I hope your children do have that chance to walk in a healed world.
I know that I'm still healing. And I'm the first generation that didn't have all of this in my physical world. So I'm just praying that at some point in my own body, I can remove the policies so that when I have a child in my womb, I'm not passing that down